The bar smelled of spilled beer and old wood as Alina Brooks stepped inside the small coastal tavern, her boots clicking softly against the worn floorboards. She wore a simple jacket over a dark shirt, jeans tight enough to show she had strength, but loose enough to blend in. Her hair was tied back and her eyes scanned the room, not looking for anyone in particular. Just wanting a quiet night after weeks of grueling training. Yet even as she moved toward the corner booth, something in the air felt charged, to tension she could not place, and the hairs along her neck rose slightly, as if warning her of what was to come. Group of young men entered, laughing loudly, their energy bouncing off the walls like a live wire. They were rough around the edges, still learning the boundaries of courage and respect. Their voices cut through the low hum of the bar, and Alina watched quietly as one of them knocked into a stool, sending a coaster flying. She barely glanced at it, pretending not to notice. But the group had begun to notice her, their eyes narrowing and whispers passing between them about the quiet woman who looked out of place, and she felt a faint smile touch her lips, because they had no idea who they were facing or what she was capable of doing. If provoked, the first glass was accidental, or so it seemed. The young man at the counter leaned too far, spilling his drink across the bar, and it splashed against the edge of crease. And it splashed against the edge of Race froze for a moment, her training telling her to stay calm, to assess and to control the situation without drawing attention. But the men erupted in laughter, pointing at her as if she were the punchline of a private joke. Her eyes met theirs for the first time fully, and she noticed the arrogance in their posture, the way they believed no one would fight back. And in that instant, Alina knew she had to decide how far she would let this go before something irreversible happened. She remained seated, letting them think they had won the first round, but inside her muscles coiled, ready to respond. She let her eyes wander slowly across the bar, noting exits, noting possible witnesses, noting the subtle ways the group shifted when they thought no one was watching. She could see the edge of her tactical mind sharpening like a blade as she waited for them to make their next move. Their laughter grew louder. Some of them started teasing her directly, mocking the way she sat, the way she held her cup, the faint smile that refused to vanish. And she knew the calm before the storm was nearly over, because one wrong step could ignite everything around them. Of the men leaned closer, sneering words meant to provoke anger, meant to test limits. Alina felt the heat of adrenaline rise in her veins, a familiar rush she had felt countless times in training missions overseas. Her heartbeat slowed, and she focused on her breathing, controlled and precise. She let the man think he was winning the psychological battle while her mind ran through possibilities, techniques and contingencies, as if the room were a battlefield and she were already 2 moves ahead and in. That moment, she understood they had underestimated her, and that they would soon find out exactly what they were dealing with. The bartender watched from behind the counter, noticing the shift in the air, noticing the subtle way Elena's hands tightened around her glass. Even though she said nothing, the group thought they had a private joke unfolding. But tension began to curl around the room like smoke threatening to ignite into fire. The young men laughed louder, but there was a flicker of hesitation in one of their eyes, and Alina caught it, because she knew that instinctive fear, the kind that only surfaces when someone senses real skill waiting to strike. And the longer they stayed, the closer the storm drew near, without them realizing what would happen next. The tallest of the group slammed his fist on the bar, causing glasses to rattle. And he challenged her, daring her to respond, telling her she looked like she would break if touched. Alina did not flinch, did not move. She simply stared at him calmly, as if measuring the exact moment to act. The other men leaned in closer, their confidence still inflated, unaware that the person they mocked had commanded entire teams and operations that demanded life and death decisions. And Alina felt the tension twist tighter around her chest, as if the very air had thickened, and she knew one subtle move and everything in the room would change forever. Final careless shove sent one of the men too close to her booth, and the liquid from another drink spilled across her sleeve. This time she did not flinch. Instead, she lifted her gaze. And the room seemed to pause in recognition of a predator fully aware and calculating. Her eyes locked with the instigator, his bravado. Faltering slightly as instinct whispered at him, warning that the quiet woman he had mocked was not what she appeared, and the silence stretched long enough for everyone to feel it creeping around them, waiting for the first strike to erupt into chaos that no one in the bar would ever forget. Her muscles tensed like coiled springs, and she leaned slightly forward, not aggressively, but in a way that signaled readiness. The young men laughed nervously, unsure if her calm was real or if it masked something far more dangerous. Elena's lips barely moved as she whispered under her breath, a reminder to herself to stay precise, to stay controlled, yet the room seemed to vibrate with anticipation, like the moments before a storm hits the coast. And the smallest ripple could unleash devastation, and the men did not yet know that the storm had already arrived and was about to be unleashed. The tallest man stepped forward, his bravado trying to reclaim control, but his confidence wavered as he saw Elena shift her weight subtly, her posture controlled and unyielding. Her eyes never left his face, and the bar seemed to shrink around them, the laughter fading into silence as the tension thickened like a storm cloud ready to break. The other men began to sense it, their movements slowing, their smiles faltering, as instinct warned them that this was no ordinary civiliate, that something lethal, calm, and precise was about to unfold right in front of them. Melina leaned slightly to the side, letting them underestimate her for one final moment. She let the silence stretch as if measuring the exact impact of her next move. The tallest man smirked, still believing he was untouchable, still thinking his size and his strength would intimidate her. And then, with emotion so fast it barely registered, she stepped forward, closing the distance between them in a blur. His eyes widened just before her hand moved with perfect precision, striking a pressure point that sent him staggering backward into the wall. He hit hard, and the bar seemed to shake under the force of it, and the room gasped as realization began to dawn among the other men. The second man lunged instinctively, trying to help his friend, but Elena moved again with practiced skill, her hands and legs working with military precision. She disarmed his advance, redirecting his momentum, sending him crashing onto the floor with a controlled motion that left him winded and unable to rise. The bar was silent, every patron frozen, as the sound of the thud echoed like a gunshot. The men finally understood the truth. The woman they mocked was a force they had never seen, and they were trapped in her presence with no option but to surrender. And she knew the lesson had only begun. Elena stood calmly, brushing the sleeve of her jacket as the two men struggled on the floor, groaning in pain. Their faces reflected disbelief and fear, their arrogance shattered as she slowly reached into her pocket and pulled out her military identification, revealing her name and her rank. Commander Elena Brooks, Navy SEAL Task Force Leader. The room froze, her calm, unwavering authority filling the space as the others realized the very woman they had taunted controlled every mission and operation they were a part of, and every move they had ever made in the field was under her command. Whispers rose around the bar, some patrons staring in awe, others shaking their heads, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Elena did not gloat, she did not smile, she simply turned and addressed the room, her voice low, steady, commanding. Respect, she reminded them, that strength without discipline is meaningless, courage without intelligence is dangerous, and that respect is earned, not assumed. The two men on the floor looked up at her, eyes wide, knowing they had crossed a line they could never erase, and that the consequences of mocking her would ripple through their entire unit. Young operators surrounding the bar began to understand the weight of their actions, the fear mingling with newfound respect as Elena guided the injured men to sit and remain still. She instructed the bartender to call medical while she assessed the situation, her presence radiating control and authority. The patrons whispered among themselves, and the air buzzed with adrenaline and shock because no one had ever witnessed skill and power concealed. Beneath such calm and composure, and the revelation that the quiet woman they had mocked was their commander, stunned them. Into complete silence, Lena stepped toward the door, pausing as she glanced back at the bar one last time. She knew the lesson had been delivered and that her team would never underestimate her again. She walked into the night, the cool air brushing against her face, her mind already returning to strategy and planning, and the young men left behind could only stare at the door, knowing that everything had changed forever, and that they had just witnessed the quiet fury of the Navy SEAL who commanded their entire task force, and that the night would haunt their memories for the rest of their lives.